Hey there, sleepyheads. Welcome back to the channel. Before we drift into Rick and Morty's toxic love story, I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is. So grab your coffee, dim the lights, and get cozy. There was a man who collected the dreams that people forgot upon waking, and in a lighthouse that hadn't guided ships for 30 years, he kept them safe in mason jars that glowed like captured starlight. But before he became the keeper of forgotten dreams, he was simply a baby who arrived on a tide that whispered secrets, wrapped in kelp that shimmered with the memory of distant shores. Let me tell you something true and soft. You are deeply loved, more than you know, and we genuinely care about the weight you carry and the dreams you hold. This story is a quiet place for you to rest, a gentle harbor where your heart can simply be. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee, and let's get started. The storm that brought him was unlike any the coastal town of Saltmere had ever seen. It didn't rage or destroy, but hummed like a lullaby made of wind and rain, falling from a sky woven with threads of deep indigo and silver. The waves rolled in with unusual gentleness, carrying strange gifts, luminous shells that pulsed with inner light, kelp that glowed like captured aurora, and something else, something precious beyond measure. Coral Weatherby found him at dawn, as she had found so many of the sea's offerings over her 43 years as lighthouse keeper. She was a woman with hands weathered like driftwood and eyes that held the deep, knowing calm of the ocean itself. But never had she discovered anything quite like this, a baby nestled in emerald kelp that seemed to cradle him with purposeful tenderness, his tiny fists curled, his breathing soft and steady as if he had been sleeping peacefully through his entire mysterious journey. His eyes, when they fluttered open, were the color of twilight reflecting on still water. He didn't cry or startle, but simply gazed at her with an ancient, unblinking peace that made her breath catch. The kelp that had protected him dissolved at her touch, leaving only the faint scent of starlight and something indefinable, the smell of the moment just before sleep takes hold. She named him River because he seemed to flow rather than move, settling into her arms as if he had always belonged there. When she carried him up the winding path to the white lighthouse tower, the very air around him seemed to thicken with a peculiar stillness that soothed everything it touched. The dust motes dancing in the morning sunbeams moved more slowly. The gulls outside called more softly, and Coral felt her own breathing deepen and slow. From his very first days in the lighthouse, River possessed an unusual gift. Fussy babies in the village would calm completely in his presence, their cries softening to gentle sighs. Adults plagued by restless nights found themselves yawning when he was near, suddenly remembering lullabies their own mothers had sung decades ago. Dr. Emerson, examining the mysterious foundling, noted something extraordinary. The baby's heartbeat seemed to synchronize with those around him, not in distress, but as if he were naturally attuned to some deeper rhythm of rest and peace. Coral felt it too, this strange magic that radiated from the child. In the evenings, when she would rock him in the old chair beside the lighthouse's great lens, she found herself remembering dreams she had forgotten from years past. Dreams of flying over moonlit water, of conversations with her late husband, of gardens that bloomed with flowers made of pure light. These memories would surface gently, like treasures washing ashore, and she began to understand that River was somehow connected to the mysterious realm where consciousness goes to rest. The lighthouse, which had guided ships for generations, now seemed to serve a different purpose. Visitors would climb the winding path drawn by something they couldn't name, staying longer than planned, talking in soft voices about childhood memories and half-forgotten hopes. River would sleep peacefully in his cradle, while conversations flowed like gentle currents around him, and people would leave feeling lighter, more connected to something beautiful and eternal. As autumn settled over Saltmere, Coral began to notice something else. On mornings after particularly vivid community dreams, she would find strange gossamer wisps along the shoreline, delicate as spider silk, but glowing with soft, pearl-like light. She would gather them carefully in small glass vials, not knowing why, only sensing that they were precious, that they belonged with River somehow, in the lighthouse that had become a sanctuary for the town's sleeping hearts. Those gossamer wisps that Coral had collected through the winter months became River's first teachers, though he didn't understand their lessons yet. As he grew from crawling to walking with that same fluid grace that had named him, the glass vials seemed to call to him in ways that words never could. He would sit among them on quiet afternoons, his small hands tracing patterns in the air above their gentle glow, humming melodies that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than memory. Coral watched this communion between child and light with the patient wisdom of someone who had tended mysteries for decades. She began teaching him the lighthouse's true purpose, polishing the great lens together as she spoke in her voice like distant waves. "Not all light is for warning ships away. From danger, little river," she would murmur, her weathered hands guiding his smaller ones across the brass fittings. "Some light is for welcoming weary travelers home. Some light is for comforting the darkness itself." The lighthouse had indeed begun to change during those quiet months. The great lens that had once cast its beam across treacherous waters now seemed to gather light rather than project it, collecting moonbeams and starshine and something else, something that came from the sleeping hearts of Saltmere. At night, it would glow with a soft, warm radiance that was visible from the village below, and people began to say it looked like a candle in a window, calling not to ships, but to dreams. It was during one of Coral's afternoon naps that River first truly understood his gift. She had settled into her favorite chair by the window, her breathing growing deep and even as sleep took hold. River, perhaps 5 years old now, sat quietly beside her, watching dust motes dance in the afternoon light. Then he saw it, a delicate thread of luminescence like spun moonlight, detaching itself from her peaceful brow and beginning to drift toward the open window. Without thinking, River reached out, his small hand closing gently around the wisp. It didn't vanish at his touch but settled into his palm, warm and alive, pulsing with a rhythm like a tiny heartbeat. In that instant, he saw a fleeting image clear as his own reflection. Coral as a young woman, laughing in a field of wildflowers, her hair catching sunlight like captured gold. He understood, with the pure certainty that belongs only to children, that he had just caught a dream she would have forgotten upon waking. When Coral stirred, refreshed and smiling, she asked, "Did I dream, River? I feel as though I did, but it's slipping away like water through my fingers." River, without words, opened his palm. The wisp of light shimmered there, and the faint scent of wildflowers filled the room. Coral's eyes widened with recognition and wonder. "So that's what they are," she whispered, "the forgotten pieces of ourselves." From that day forward, their work together took on new meaning. Coral showed River how to use the empty mason jars she kept for preserving summer's bounty, teaching him to coax the dream wisps gently into the glass vessels. Each evening, as twilight painted the lighthouse walls in shades of lavender and gold, they would arrange the day's collection on shelves that spiraled up the interior walls, creating a constellation of captured wonder. River learned to read the subtle language of sleep, sensing when a dream was about to detach from its dreamer. A shift in the air, a barely audible sigh, the way shadows seemed to lean inward with anticipation. He didn't chase these ethereal fragments but waited with infinite patience, his presence becoming a gentle magnet for the drifting wisps of human experience. A child's dream of flying would glow golden in its jar, pulsing with remembered joy. A fisherman's dream of waters thick with silver fish would shimmer like scales in moonlight. A widow's dream of dancing once more with her late husband would cast the softest pearl light, tender as a whispered endearment. Coral began labeling, each jar with careful handwriting, noting the date and a small symbol that captured the dream's essence. A bird for flying, waves for the sea, intertwined hearts for love. Together they were creating something unprecedented. A library of the human heart's most private wanderings, a sanctuary where even the most fleeting moments of wonder could find safe harbor. The townspeople of Saltmere began sleeping more deeply, their dreams growing richer and more vivid, though come morning these nocturnal journeys would fade as dreams always do. Yet somehow their essence found its way to the lighthouse, carried on currents invisible to all but River, who was learning that some gifts are meant not for keeping, but for tending with infinite gentle care. The townspeople of Saltmere began sleeping more deeply, their dreams growing richer and more vivid, though come morning these nocturnal journeys would fade, as dreams always do. Yet somehow their essence found its way to the lighthouse, carried, on currents invisible to all but River, who was learning that some gifts are meant not for keeping, but for tending with infinite gentle care. The collection grew with River's understanding, each jar finding its natural place in what had become a spiraling constellation of captured wonder. By his 8th year, River moved through the lighthouse with the fluid certainty of someone who had learned to read the invisible currents of sleep itself. The dream wisps no longer surprised him with their arrival. He felt them approaching like distant music, a gentle hum in the air that spoke of minds settling into rest somewhere in the village below. Coral taught him the art of organization, and together they developed a system that honored both beauty and purpose. The golden dreams of childhood adventures, flying through clouds, racing with dolphins, building castles from starlight, clustered near the eastern windows where morning sun could dance through their warm glow. Higher up the spiral, where shadows offered gentler privacy, rested the deep indigo dreams of quiet contemplation, often belonging to Saltmere's elders who dreamed of gardens long tended and conversations with old friends. The rarest dreams, those shimmering silver wisps that carried the essence of profound love or sudden understanding, found their home near the great lens itself, as if drawing strength from its enduring light. River discovered that each dream carried its own texture, as distinct as fingerprints. Some drifted toward his cupped hands like dandelion seeds finding a warm palm, seeming almost relieved to be noticed. Others required patience and the gentlest of humming, a note that Coral called the shore's frequency, barely more than breath, but somehow exactly what the drifting wisp needed to feel safe enough to settle. On mornings when the tide was at its gentlest, River would walk the dawn path between dune grass and tide pools, gathering the dreams that had traveled on ocean currents from distant shores. These carried the taste of salt and often held fragments of lullabies from places he had never seen, arriving at the lighthouse like letters written in light. It was during one of these morning walks that River encountered old Mr. Silas, who had been visiting the lighthouse with increasing frequency, drawn by the inexplicable peace that seemed to radiate from its walls. The elderly man often spoke of his ancient oak tree, worrying aloud that it wouldn't survive the next great storm. River had collected one of Mr. Silas's dreams the week before, a particularly potent wisp that pulsed with deep earthy green light and smelled faintly of rich soil and ancient wood. When Mr. Silas mentioned that he'd been sleeping more peacefully, lately feeling somehow more rooted and less anxious about his beloved tree, River began to understand something profound. The dreams he collected weren't simply forgotten images. They were emotional residue, the quiet processing that helped hearts heal and minds find balance. By preserving them, he wasn't stealing memories, but ensuring that the peace, the insight, the gentle resolution that occurred in sleep didn't simply vanish into the morning air. This realization deepened River's sense of purpose. He learned to listen not just for the approaching wisps, but for the subtle tug that told him when a dream needed to return to its dreamer rather than join the collection. Some dreams, he discovered, were meant to be remembered, their healing, work incomplete. These he would guide gently back to sleeping brows, watching as peaceful smiles crossed the faces of those who would wake with inexplicable comfort. The townspeople began speaking of the lighthouse in hushed, reverent tones. Fishermen would pause on the coastal path, suddenly remembering lullabies their grandmothers had sung. Mothers found their children sleeping more deeply after visiting Coral for tea and staying to watch the afternoon light dance through the dream-filled jars. Word spread quietly, person to person, that something healing waited within those white-painted walls. River understood now that his gift wasn't about collecting, but about tending, creating a sanctuary where the human heart's most private wanderings could find safe harbor. The lighthouse, once a beacon guiding ships safely to shore, had become something equally vital. A keeper of dreams, a guardian of the gentle mysteries that bloomed in the space between sleeping and waking. Each evening, as he and Coral arranged, The day's new arrivals among their glowing companions, River felt the deep satisfaction of work that mattered. Here in mason jars that caught and held the light of human experience, nothing precious was ever truly lost. The dreams waited patiently, their soft luminescence a quiet promise that wonder, once touched by consciousness, could live forever. The seasons turned like pages in a well-loved book, and with them came River's deeper understanding of the gentle, currents that connected all sleeping hearts. By his 12th year, he had grown tall and graceful like the lighthouse itself, moving through Saltmere with an unhurried presence that seemed to slow time around him. His gift had matured beyond simply catching forgotten dreams. He had become a living lullaby, a quiet guardian whose very existence created ripples of peace that touched every corner of the coastal town. The change was most noticeable in the small, everyday moments that make up a life. Mrs. Holloway, who ran the bakery on Gull's Rest Street, began leaving warm loaves on the lighthouse doorstep without being asked, claiming she always made too much bread anyway. The truth, which she felt but couldn't name, was that kneading dough while the lighthouse's gentle glow filled her peripheral vision brought back the same contentment she'd known as a child helping her grandmother bake. Her dreams of flour-dusted, hands and yeast-scented mornings found their way to River's collection, where they pulsed with golden warmth that made everyone who passed think of home. River had learned to recognize those who carried invisible burdens, reading the subtle signs. Like an ancient language written in the space between heartbeats, young Timothy Fletcher, whose nightmares had plagued him since his father's fishing boat was lost in a storm, discovered that walking past the lighthouse on his way to school somehow made the shadows seem less threatening. River had been collecting Timothy's fear dreams for months, dark wisps that required special care, held in jars wrapped with soft cloth to gentle their sharp edges. But more importantly, he had learned to transform them through patient tending, their terror slowly dissolving like storm clouds breaking apart to reveal stars. It was during one of these transformations that River discovered his most profound ability. As Timothy sat on the lighthouse steps one afternoon, tears still damp on his cheeks from another sleepless night, River felt the familiar tug of an approaching wisp. But this time, instead of collecting it, he caught the dark fragment and held it in his cupped hands, humming the shore's low frequency until its edges softened from jagged black to gentle gray. Then, with infinite care, he breathed it back to Timothy, watching as the boy's shoulders relaxed and his breathing deepened into the rhythm of natural sleep. Dr. Emerson, now graying at the temples and carrying the weight of too many difficult diagnoses, had begun what he privately called lighthouse visits during his evening rounds. He would sit in the dream-lit room, ostensibly checking on Coral's arthritis, but really allowing his own restless mind to settle into something approaching peace. He couldn't explain in medical terms why 20 minutes in River's presence accomplished what his sleeping powders could not, but he had stopped questioning miracles that worked. The lighthouse's reputation spread through the coastal communities. With the gentle persistence of morning mist, carried on whispered conversations, and the inexplicable sense of well-being that visitors took home like shells in their pockets. Fishermen from neighboring villages would time their routes to pass near Saltmere's shore, claiming the waters seemed calmer there. Travelers found themselves taking the longer coastal road, drawn by stories of a place where sleep came easily and dreams felt safe. Coral watched her adopted son develop this intuitive wisdom with the quiet pride of someone who had planted a rare seed and witnessed it bloom beyond all expectation. Her own steps had grown slower, her hands more weathered by time, but her eyes held a deep satisfaction when they rested on River. She had taught him to tend the lighthouse's physical beacon, but he had shown her that some lights were meant to shine inward, illuminating the secret landscapes of the human heart. As autumn settled over Saltmere with its familiar embrace of salt-tinged air and earlier darkness, River understood that the lighthouse had become something unprecedented, not just a sanctuary for forgotten dreams, but a living testament to the healing power of witnessed sleep. Each evening, as he and Coral arranged the day's new arrivals among their glowing companions, he felt the deep contentment of work that mattered, knowing that in this spiraling constellation of captured light, no precious moment of human experience would ever truly be lost. Winter settled over Saltmere like a familiar quilt, bringing with it the kind of deep quiet that makes every heartbeat audible. River, now 22 and carrying the same ancient peace in his twilight-colored eyes, had grown into his gift, with the natural grace of tides finding their rhythm. The lighthouse under his care had become something unprecedented, not merely a home or sanctuary, but a living ecosystem where human longing could take root and flourish in ways that blessed the entire coastal community. Coral moved more slowly, now her steps measured like a careful prayer, but her presence remained the lighthouse's steady anchor. She spent long afternoons in her chair beside the great lens, watching River tend their ever-growing collection with hands that seemed to conduct invisible symphonies. Her weathered fingers still found comfort in polishing the brass fittings, each circular motion a meditation on decades of faithful service. It was during these quiet winter days that Coral began sharing the lighthouse's deepest secrets, wisdom she had been saving like rare shells for exactly this moment. "River," she said one afternoon as snow whispered against the windows, "these dreams we tend are not just forgotten fragments, they're seeds of possibility, waiting in our care until hearts are ready to receive them again." She showed him how certain dreams, when properly nurtured, could merge and strengthen each other. How a fisherman's dream of calm seas could settle into a mother's anxious sleep, how a child's dream of flying could lift the spirits of an elder confined to bed. The lighthouse had become a place where human experience cross-pollinated in the most gentle ways, each preserved dream contributing to a greater harmony that touched everyone within its sphere of influence. River learned to recognize the subtle signs that indicated when dreams were ready to return home. Sometimes visitors would climb the lighthouse path, drawn by inexplicable longing, and he would sense immediately which glowing jar held what their hearts needed most. A woman with paint-stained fingers arrived one February morning, her eyes holding the particular sadness of abandoned creativity, and River guided her to a decade-old dream that pulsed with colors like aurora borealis, her own forgotten vision of painting the sea's infinite moods. The townspeople had begun speaking of the lighthouse in hushed, reverent tones, understanding without words that something sacred dwelled within its walls. Children slept more peacefully after visiting, their nightmares transformed into gentle adventures. Adults found themselves humming lullabies they couldn't remember learning, carrying home a contentment that lingered like the scent of sea roses as spring's first hints touched the air. Coral began the delicate work of preparing River for his full inheritance. She spoke of the lighthouse keeper's deepest responsibility, understanding that some lights are meant to guide others long after their original tender has joined the eternal tide. Her voice carried the soft authority of someone passing along. Sacred knowledge, each word chosen with infinite care. On a night when the aurora borealis painted the sky in ribbons of green and gold, Coral settled into her chair for the final time. Her breathing grew soft and rhythmic, her face peaceful as moonlight on still water. River sat beside her, holding her hand as he had learned to do with all those preparing for sleep's deepest embrace. As dawn approached, he witnessed the most beautiful dream wisp he had ever encountered, silver and gold and pearl white, detaching itself from her peaceful brow with the grace of a butterfly taking flight. But this time, he didn't reach out to capture it. Instead, he watched with wonder as it settled into the great lens itself, becoming part of the lighthouse's eternal glow. Coral's final dream was of him, grown gentle and wise, tending the lighthouse and its collection with infinite care, surrounded by others who had learned to honor the sacred space between sleeping and waking. When the townspeople came to pay their respects, they found River standing quietly beside her peaceful form, his presence radiating the same deep calm that had blessed Saltmere for so many years, understanding that she had not left but had become part of the light itself. The weeks following Coral's passing moved through River like tides working through shore, steady, returning, reshaping without destroying. In the ebb of grief, something tender was revealed, the urge to keep opening doors. He spoke to her chair by the great lens sometimes, not with words, but with the same quiet attention he gave the dream jars, and the pearl-white light of her final wisp would shimmer in response, warm against his cheek like a blessing. It was while kneading bread in the lighthouse kitchen, a practice Coral had taught him for calming anxious minds, that understanding, bloomed. The scent of warm dough filled the air, and River found himself thinking of her practical wisdom, how she had always grounded the lighthouse's ethereal magic in simple daily comforts. The townspeople climbed the path seeking peace, but they also needed harbor in their waking hours, comfort they could taste and carry home. Mrs. Holloway arrived that morning with her usual offering of fresh loaves, but this time she lingered, her weathered hands tracing the kitchen counter. "River," she said softly, "folks are wondering if you might consider opening these lower rooms, not as anything grand, but as a place where people could come when sleep feels far away." Her voice carried the careful hope of someone making an offering to something sacred. The idea settled into River's consciousness like a dream finding its proper jar. He spent days walking through the lighthouse's lower chambers, rooms that had served as Coral's simple living quarters, but now seemed to call for different purpose. The kitchen, with its wide windows facing the sea, felt like a natural gathering place where comfort could be offered in the most essential ways. River began, slowly, opening just the kitchen and small adjoining parlor, where Coral's reading chair still held decades of peaceful evenings. He kept changes minimal, a few additional seats arranged to encourage quiet conversation, shelves lined with mason jars that caught sea light, and most importantly, a simple counter where he could prepare food that tasted like memory itself. He painted a modest sign for the path: sandwiches, tea and rest. When he lifted the shutter on the first morning, sunlight moved across the room and paused as if to approve. The dream jars lining the stairwell hummed at their usual frequency, not brighter but somehow nearer. Mr. Silas was first to come, hat in hand, eyes damp with sentiment he tried to hide. River made him a sandwich with fresh rye, tomatoes kissed by summer sunlight, and rosemary oil that coaxed memories of rich earth from hiding places. He served it with tea that steamed gently, and Mr. Silas took one bite, closed his eyes, and set a hand over his chest, as though greeting a long-absent friend. "This tastes like afternoons under the oak," he whispered, voice rough with gratitude. River never measured flavor the way recipe books insisted. He listened. Each person carried a small weather system into the room, the salt of worry, forgotten, sweetness, the wind shift of changing seasons, and he built sandwiches like shelters. Sometimes before the first slice was laid down, he would pause and hold the air the way he held dream wisps, catching the softest hint of night's peace. He didn't put dreams into the food. That would have felt like theft. He let the calm he kept in the lighthouse infuse the room until the bread itself seemed to exhale contentment. By evening, his small bell had chimed enough to feel like lullaby. People lingered, cupping mugs in both hands, speaking in low voices about ordinary miracles, the first good sleep after months of restlessness, forgotten songs returning whole, the way morning light had seemed kinder to their tired eyes. The jars on the walls watched with soft luminescence, and River felt Coral's presence like sun behind clouds, unseen, undeniable, blessing the work that honored her deepest understanding of what it meant to keep light alive. She arrived as the lighthouse bell was marking evening's gentle approach, her footsteps on the path carrying the particular rhythm of someone who had forgotten how to be still. Luna Ashworth paused at the threshold, paint stains mapping her fingers like small continents of color, her eyes holding the glassy exhaustion of someone who had been awake too long in a world that insisted on spinning towards sleep without her. River looked up from arranging tomorrow's bread to rise and immediately felt the weather around her, restless as storm clouds, brittle as sea glass, carrying the metallic tang of creativity turned against itself. She wore exhaustion like an ill-fitting coat, her dark hair escaping from a bun that had given up hours ago, and when she spoke, her voice carried the roughened edges of too many conversations with empty canvases. "I heard people sleep better after visiting here," she said, the words tumbling out like stones she'd been carrying too long. "I haven't slept properly in 8 months. I keep seeing colors that don't exist, hearing brush strokes that never happened. I think I'm losing my mind, but I'm hoping you might have tea that tastes like sanity." River recognized the particular shadow that clung to creative spirits when their gift became their torment. He had collected dreams from artists before, wisps that pulsed with colors beyond earthly palettes, fragments of visions too large for single minds to hold. But Luna's presence suggested something deeper, a disconnection that went beyond simple insomnia into the territory where inspiration and desperation blurred together. Without asking her preference, he began preparing what his intuition whispered was needed. Chamomile tea steeped with honey that held the memory of summer meadows, and a sandwich built on bread still warm from the afternoon's baking. The filling came together like a gentle incantation, soft cheese that tasted of contentment, cucumber slices that held dawn's coolness, and butter infused with herbs that grew wild along the lighthouse path. Each ingredient chosen not for flavor alone, but for the peace it carried. As he worked, River became aware of the dream wisps that clung to Luna like invisible thorns, half-formed fragments of sleep that had tried to take hold but couldn't quite settle, creating the very restlessness that kept her from the peace she desperately needed. They drifted around her in agitated spirals, beautiful but broken, carrying the weight of unfinished paintings and abandoned visions. He set the plate before her with the same reverence he showed the dream jars, and Luna took her first bite with the careful attention of someone who had forgotten that food could be comfort rather than mere necessity. Her eyes widened as flavors bloomed across her palate, not just the taste of well-prepared ingredients, but something indefinable that reminded her of childhood afternoons spent drawing in her grandmother's garden, of the particular contentment that comes from creating something beautiful with patient hands. "This tastes like," she began, then stopped, her artist's eye catching the soft constellation of light that spiraled up the stairwell. "What are those?" she whispered, setting down her sandwich, as wonder replaced exhaustion in her voice for the first time in months. River followed her gaze to the mason jars that lined the walls, each holding its own gentle luminescence, like captured stars arranged by careful hands. "Dreams," he said simply, the word carrying all the weight of truth and mystery it contained. "The ones people forget when they wake. I gather them, tend them, keep them safe until they're needed again." Luna stood slowly, drawn by instinct toward beauty in its purest form. As she moved closer to the glowing collection, River felt the familiar stirring in the air that suggested rest was finally approaching. The agitated wisps around her began to slow their restless dance, and for the first time since her arrival, her breathing deepened into something approaching the rhythm of natural sleep. He hummed the shore's low frequency, barely more than breath, and watched as one particularly beautiful wisp, silver blue shot through with violet, settled into his cupped palm before he breathed it gently back to her, like returning a shell to the tide. The silver blue wisp settled into Luna's consciousness, like paint finding its perfect canvas, and River watched as months of accumulated tension dissolved from her shoulders, like morning mist touched by sunlight. Her breathing deepened into the natural rhythm of someone finally allowed to stop fighting sleep, and when she swayed slightly on her feet, he guided her to Coral's old reading chair with the gentle certainty of tides finding shore. She curled into the worn cushions as if they had been waiting decades for exactly this moment, her paint-stained fingers relaxing against the chair's arms, her face softening into the peaceful expression of someone who had forgotten what rest felt like. River covered her with a blanket that Coral had knitted from wool holding the scent of sea roses and summer evenings, then settled nearby to keep watch as Luna fell into sleep deeper than ocean trenches. The dreams that rose from her sleeping form were visible to River in ways that still filled him with quiet wonder, swirls of color that defied earthly palettes, visions of paintings that existed only in the space between sleeping and waking. He gathered none of these, understanding that Luna needed every fragment of inspiration her unconscious mind could weave together. Instead, he simply hummed the shore's low frequency, smoothing any frayed edges until sleep held her completely. Luna slept for 14 hours, her body claiming rest it had been denied, and when she finally stirred as afternoon light painted the lighthouse walls in shades of amber and gold, her first words carried the quiet amazement of someone discovering they still remembered how to breathe. "I slept," she whispered. "Really slept. I feel like I've been holding my breath for months and finally remembered how to exhale." River brought her tea that steamed with chamomile and honey and bread still warm from the morning's baking. As Luna ate, Her artist's eye traced the spiraling constellation of preserved dreams, and he could see understanding blooming in her expression like flowers opening to first light. "You're not just collecting them," she said, her voice carrying clarity that comes after profound rest. "This whole lighthouse is like a living painting, isn't it? Each jar is a brushstroke in something larger than any single canvas could hold." The insight struck River with the force of gentle revelation. He had never thought of his work in artistic terms, but Luna's words illuminated something he had sensed but never named. The lighthouse had become a masterpiece woven from human experience, each preserved dream contributing to a composition that blessed everyone who encountered it. When Luna asked to join his morning ritual, River felt the familiar stirring that suggested new currents were beginning to flow. They walked the shoreline as dawn painted wet sand with shifting patterns of light, the air crisp with salt and possibility. River moved with practiced awareness, his eyes scanning not for shells or driftwood, but for the gossamer wisps that clung to kelp and danced above tide pools. "There," he said softly, pointing to a shimmer caught on seaweed, barely visible against the rising sun. It pulsed with faint, iridescent blue, like a fragment of distant galaxy. Someone in Saltmere dreamed of flying among stars. He knelt with fluid grace, coaxing the wisp into a glass vial where it settled, glowing with its own inner cosmos. Luna watched with the focused attention of someone recognizing their own medium in unexpected form. Each wisp carried unique qualities. A child's dream of sandcastles glowed golden and smelled of sunshine and salt, while a baker's vision of perfectly risen bread emanated warm, yeasty light that made her think of comfort given form. Back at Argentine, the lighthouse River demonstrated his careful process of transferring each wisp into larger mason jars, labeling them with dates and small symbolic sketches. Luna began drawing in her notebook, not the grand landscapes she usually pursued, but the subtle interplay of light and memory that filled the lighthouse's spiraling chambers. She realized her own art had been missing something essential. This quality of gentle tending, of finding profound beauty in the fragments others had forgotten. The colors she had seen during her sleepless nights weren't hallucinations, but dreams trying to reach her, and River was teaching her how to listen with more than just her eyes. Luna's presence in the lighthouse settled like watercolor bleeding into canvas, her artistic vision blending with River's dream tending in ways that surprised them both. She had begun arriving each morning with her easel, setting up where light could dance through the mason jars and paint shifting constellations across her work. Her brushstrokes moved with new patience now, no longer chasing visions that fled, at dawn but capturing the gentle permanence of tended dreams. River noticed that when Luna painted, the air itself seemed steadier, and the dream wisps that sometimes gathered restlessly at the threshold would slow their dance, recognizing sanctuary. It was during one of these peaceful mornings that they heard footsteps on the lighthouse path, carrying the particular weight of someone climbing toward hope they weren't sure they believed in. The woman who appeared in the doorway held the careful composure of someone balancing on the edge of breaking, her hand resting protectively on the shoulder of a boy whose eyes held too much knowledge for such a small face. "I'm Sarah Whitmore," she said, her voice barely audible above the distant sound of waves. "This is my son, Sage. Someone in town said you might be able to help us. He hasn't dreamed since the fire took our house 6 months ago. The doctors say his sleep is empty, restless. He wakes exhausted every morning, and I can see him disappearing a little more each day." River felt it immediately, the profound absence that surrounded Sage like a cold current in warm water. Where other children carried the invisible shimmer of approaching dreams, this boy moved through the world wrapped in protective silence. No wisps drifted from his presence, no gentle luminescence gathered in his wake. It was as if some essential part of him had simply stopped believing in the possibility of wonder, sealing off the pathways to dreams, like a house boarding up its windows against another storm. Luna looked up from her canvas, her artist's intuition immediately recognizing the particular quality of emptiness that surrounded the child. She set down her brush and moved closer, not with the urgency of someone trying to fix something broken, but with the patient attention of someone willing to sit with sorrow until it was ready to transform. River knelt to Sage's eye level, his, movements slow and unthreatening. "Would you like some warm milk?" he asked, his voice carrying the same gentle frequency he used to coax wisps from their hiding places. "And maybe Luna could show you what she's been painting." He prepared the milk with extra care, sweetening it with honey that held the memory of sun-drenched meadows, understanding that some healing required the gentlest possible approach. He didn't ask about the fire or try to offer premature comfort, but simply created a space where silence could feel safe rather than empty. Luna began mixing softer colors on her palette, pearl gray, warm silver, the faintest hint of blue like dawn reflected on still water. She painted while Sage explored the lighthouse with careful steps, her brush capturing not the dream jars themselves, but the quality of patient waiting that filled the spiraling chambers, the sense that even the most fragile parts of oneself could be held and kept safe. "Sometimes," River explained softly as Sage traced the air above a jar that pulsed with golden light, "the most important thing is simply to rest, to let your heart be quiet. Dreams will find their way back when your heart is ready to welcome them, like birds returning to a nest after a long journey." River understood that Sage's dreamless sleep wasn't emptiness but protection, his mind's wise retreat into a safe void after experiencing too much, too suddenly. Forcing dreams back would be like forcing a flower to bloom in winter. Instead, he became a guardian of absence, sitting with Sage in comfortable silence, teaching him to watch dust motes dance in sunbeams, to listen to the distant cry of gulls, to feel the slow, steady rhythm of the lighthouse itself. As afternoon light slanted through the windows, Sage asked the question River had been waiting for without knowing it. If someone stopped dreaming, could they learn how to start again? The words carried such quiet longing that even the mason jars seemed to pulse with extra warmth, as if responding to the first sign that wonder might be ready to return. River's answer came like the shore's own wisdom, patient and sure. "Dreams. They're like migratory birds, Sage," he said, his voice carrying the same gentle frequency he used to coax wisps from their hiding places. "They leave when the season is harsh, but they always remember the way home, especially when a heart begins to prepare a warm welcome." He reached for an empty mason jar, clear as morning light, and placed it on the windowsill beside Coral's chair. "This is a promise jar," he explained, "not to trap dreams, but to show them you're keeping space ready whenever they're ready to return." Sage touched the glass with fingertips still paint-stained from Luna's gentle lessons, and River felt something shift in the lighthouse's atmosphere, not healing yet, but the first whisper of possibility, like air deciding it might become breeze. Sarah's shoulders released tension she'd been carrying for months, and Luna set down her brush to witness this delicate moment with the reverence it deserved. In the weeks that followed, River wove a ritual of safety around Sage's visits, understanding that trust, like dreams, returns only when it senses the world has become gentle again. Each afternoon brought the boy to his special corner, where light fell softest, surrounded by the patient glow of preserved wonder, but never pressured to participate in its magic. River taught him the lighthouse's simplest tasks, polishing brass, fittings, arranging dream jars so their light shone clearest, sweeping the winding stairs with meditative precision. Luna had begun painting smaller canvases specifically for these visits, watercolors that captured the gentlest moments of daily life, a seagull resting on weathered posts, morning light touching tide pools, the way shadows moved across lighthouse walls like slow, peaceful breathing. She worked quietly while Sage watched, her brush moving with rhythm that showed him creation could be calm rather than urgent, that beauty could emerge from patience rather than force. The breakthrough arrived 3 weeks later, not as dramatic revelation, but as the softest whisper of return. Sage had fallen asleep in afternoon sunlight, curled in Coral's chair with one of Luna's newest paintings nearby, a gentle scene of clouds drifting across summer sky, painted in colors that seemed to breathe with their own inner light. River noticed it first, the faintest shimmer barely visible, detaching itself from the sleeping child's brow like dandelion seed taking tentative flight. It was the smallest dream wisp River had ever encountered, pale as morning mist and fragile as spun glass, carrying within its translucent depths the simple image of a bird, not flying through grand adventures, but simply perched on a branch, content to exist in the gentle space between earth and sky. River held his breath as the wisp drifted toward the open window, understanding that this first dream in months was testing whether the world was safe enough for wonder to return. Instead of capturing it, River did something he had never done before. He hummed the shore's low frequency and gently guided the wisp back to Sage, watching as it settled once again into the child's consciousness, like seed returning to fertile ground. When Sage stirred, his eyes held the faintest echo of something peaceful, and for the first time since the fire, his mother saw him smile, not the careful expression he wore to reassure adults, but the unconscious contentment of someone who had touched, however briefly, the realm of gentle possibility. "It came back," Sage whispered, wonder threading through his voice like light through water. "Just for a moment. But it came back." River nodded, understanding that this was enough. More than enough. The promise jar remained empty, but it no longer felt hollow. It held space, held hope, held the patient certainty that some migrations take time, that some journeys home require many small flights before the final landing. Luna captured this moment not in paint but in memory, her artist's heart recognizing the profound beauty of healing, measured not in grand gestures, but in the smallest return of trust. Sarah wept quietly, tears of relief rather than sorrow, finally seeing the path that would lead her son back to the country of dreams. The lighthouse hummed with gentle satisfaction, its collection of preserved dreams glowing a little brighter, as if celebrating the return of one small bird to a sky that had learned once again to welcome wonder. Word of Sage's small bird returning passed through Saltmere like morning tide, gentle and inevitable, carrying with it the quiet understanding that healing, once witnessed, creates its own momentum. Mrs. Holloway arrived at the lighthouse 3 days later, with bread still warm from her ovens and eyes bright with purpose. "River," she said, setting the loaves on his counter with the careful reverence of someone placing flowers on an altar. "The whole town's been sleeping better since that boy started dreaming again. Folks are saying we ought to have a proper way to honor the things we lose and find." River felt the idea settle into his consciousness, like a dream wisp finding its jar, not forced, but inevitable, as if the lighthouse had been waiting for exactly this moment to expand its gentle influence beyond individual healing, into something that could embrace an entire community. Luna looked up from her easel, where she had been painting the way afternoon light moved through the dream collection, her artist's intuition immediately recognizing the rightness of the suggestion. The Festival of Forgotten Things grew organically over the following weeks, shaped by conversations that happened while River prepared sandwiches and Luna mixed watercolors that seemed to capture peace itself. Mr. Silas contributed the idea of bringing small tokens, objects that carried stories of loss and rediscovery. Dr. Emerson suggested the lighthouse grounds could accommodate a gentle gathering, nothing grand or overwhelming, just space for quiet sharing and the kind of communion that happens when hearts feel safe enough to remember. Luna painted simple, wooden signs in colors soft as sea glass, arranging them along the coastal path like breadcrumbs leading home. River prepared the lighthouse's lower rooms with the same careful attention he gave to tending dreams. Extra chairs arranged in intimate circles, mason jars filled with wildflowers and smooth stones, tables covered with linens that smelled faintly of lavender and salt air. As their work progressed, River became increasingly aware of Luna's presence beside him, not as helper but as partner in something deeper than shared tasks. She moved through the lighthouse with the same fluid grace he had always carried, her artist's eye finding beauty in the smallest details, the way dust motes danced in afternoon light, the gentle percussion of waves against distant rocks, the soft luminescence that seemed to breathe from the spiraling collection of preserved dreams. Their conversations during these preparations carried the comfortable intimacy of two people who had learned to read each other's silences. Luna would pause in her painting to watch River arrange bread on cooling racks, and he would stop polishing brass fittings to observe how she mixed colors that seemed to hold their own inner light. Neither rushed toward declarations or dramatic gestures. Their connection deepened like tides, finding their natural rhythm, patient and inevitable. On the evening of the festival, as twilight painted the lighthouse in shades of pearl and rose, the townspeople of Saltmere climbed the coastal path carrying their small treasures. A single earring from a lost pair, recipe cards stained with memory, photographs faded to the color of dreams, lullabies hummed without words but rich with recognition. They came seeking not spectacle but sanctuary, drawn by the same invisible currents that had always guided lost things toward the lighthouse's patient glow. River worked behind his simple counter, building sandwiches with the same reverence he showed the dream wisps, each ingredient chosen not just for flavor, but for the comfort it carried. Luna moved among the visitors with quiet grace, her latest, paintings displayed where lamplight could dance through their translucent layers, creating the impression that peace itself had been captured in watercolor and offered as gift. As stars emerged overhead, the gathering found its natural rhythm, soft, conversations about things lost and found, gentle laughter mixing with the distant sound of waves, and threading through it all, the lighthouse's eternal hum, blessing every whispered story with the promise that nothing truly precious is ever forgotten, only waiting for the right moment to return home. The festival had settled into its gentlest rhythm when the stranger appeared at the lighthouse threshold, his presence carrying the particular weight of someone who viewed wonder as inventory rather than gift. He wore a coat that seemed to absorb the evening's soft light, and his eyes moved across the gathering with the calculating precision of someone appraising valuable objects. The conversations around him didn't exactly stop, but they shifted like tide pools, sensing a disturbance in their peaceful depths. River felt it immediately, not danger, but a fundamental discord that made the dream wisps in the upper chambers flicker with unease. Luna paused in her conversation with Sarah, her artist's intuition recognizing something that didn't belong in the lighthouse's careful harmony. Even Sage, now sleeping peacefully in Coral's old chair, stirred slightly, as if sensing shadows where none should fall. The man introduced himself as Marcus Vance, a collector of rare phenomena, his voice carrying the smooth authority of someone accustomed to acquiring what he desired. He moved through the room with practiced efficiency, his gaze lingering on the spiraling constellation of preserved dreams visible through the stairwell. "I've traveled considerable distance to see your remarkable collection," he said, his words precise as clockwork. "Particularly the darker specimens. There's quite a market for authentic nightmare essence, properly preserved fear, the full spectrum of human sleep disturbance." River felt something cold settle in his chest. Not fear, but profound sadness at the misunderstanding those words revealed. "The dreams I tend aren't commodities," he said quietly, his voice carrying the same gentle authority he used to calm restless wisps. "They're fragments of human experience, each one precious, whether it carries joy or sorrow. I don't separate them into light and dark. They're all part of the same constellation of what it means to be human." Marcus's smile held the patience of someone accustomed to initial resistance. He spoke of extraction techniques and preservation, methods of markets eager for authentic dream essence, of the fortune waiting in what he called River's underutilized inventory of negative experiences. Each word landed like pebbles thrown at still water, creating ripples of discomfort through the evening's peace. The townspeople gathered closer, not with aggression but with the instinctive protection of a community sensing threat to something sacred. Mr. Silas stepped forward, his weathered hands steady despite his age. "Son," he said, his voice carrying decades of coastal wisdom, "you're talking about something you don't understand. This isn't a shop where dreams are sold. It's a sanctuary where they're kept safe until they're needed." Dr. Emerson moved from the shadows near the stairwell, his professional authority lending weight to his words. "What you're suggesting would destroy the very thing that makes this place remarkable. Dreams aren't meant to be harvested. They're meant to be tended, the way gardeners tend growing things, understanding that even difficult growth serves a purpose." Luna moved to River's side, her presence steady as lighthouse stone, and he felt strength flow between them like current finding its proper channel. The stranger's offer had illuminated something River had always known but never articulated, that his gift wasn't about possession but about stewardship. Not about controlling dreams, but about creating space where they could exist safely until healing was complete. "Nightmares are messages that arrive in rough weather," River said finally, his voice carrying the calm certainty of someone who had learned to read the deepest currents of human sleep. "We sit with them until they say their piece, then we help them transform. They're not mistakes to be discarded or weapons to be sold. They're teachers, arriving exactly when hearts are ready to learn courage." Marcus's expression shifted from persuasive charm to something harder, more calculating, but his threats felt hollow in the lighthouse's atmosphere of gentle certainty. When he finally turned to leave, his footsteps sharp against the coastal path, the dream jars seemed to pulse with renewed warmth, and the gathering settled back into its natural rhythm of shared stories and quiet communion. River looked around, at the faces surrounding him, Sarah holding Sage close, Luna's eyes bright with protective understanding, the townspeople of Saltmere standing together in quiet solidarity, and understood that the stranger had given him something valuable, though not as intended. He had shown River the profound difference between collecting and caring, between possessing and protecting, between treating wonder as commodity and honoring it as sacred trust that would never be for sale. The weeks following Marcus, Vance's departure brought unexpected gifts, as if the lighthouse's rejection of his cold commerce had opened new channels for wonder to flow. The community that had gathered for the Festival of Forgotten Things seemed to carry home something more than memories, a strengthened conviction that some treasures could never be bought or sold, only tended with infinite care. Mrs. Holloway arrived each morning with extra bread, her eyes bright with protective purpose, and Mr. Silas took to walking the coastal path more frequently, his presence a quiet guardian against any who might mistake sanctuary for marketplace. Luna had begun a new painting series during these peaceful weeks, canvases that captured not individual dreams, but the invisible connections between them. How a child's laughter could echo through somber memory. How wisps of courage could spark hope in hearts that had forgotten their own strength. Her brushstrokes moved with the same patient rhythm River used to tend his collection, each layer of watercolor building like healing itself, gradual and inevitable. Sage continued his daily visits, his presence settling into the lighthouses, rhythm like a missing note finally finding its place in a familiar song. He moved with increasing ease through the spiraling chambers, his small hands learning to arrange dream jars so their light fell most gently, his voice growing stronger as he read aloud from Coral's old books about shorebirds and tide pools. The promise jar remained empty on the windowsill, but it no longer felt hollow. It held space, held hope, held the patient certainty that some migrations require many small flights before the final landing. It was during one of these quiet afternoons, as autumn light slanted through the lighthouse windows painting everything in shades of honey and gold, that River noticed the profound change. Sage had fallen asleep in Coral's chair after helping gather driftwood along the shore. His breathing deep and even in the way that suggested true rest had finally found him. And from his peaceful brow, something extraordinary was emerging. This wasn't the tentative, fragile wisp from weeks before. A rich, full dream was blooming from Sage's consciousness, shimmering with the iridescent blue of cloudless sky and the crisp white of seagull wings. It pulsed with unburdened joy, carrying the distinct scent of salt spray and the sound of distant, happy cries. River recognized it immediately, the dream of uninhibited flight, the kind of soaring freedom that belongs uniquely to children who have remembered how to trust the sky. River felt the familiar instinct to preserve this precious return of wonder, but deeper wisdom stayed his hands. Some dreams, he understood, were letters meant to be read and kept close, not catalogued in jars, however beautiful. This dream was too vibrant, too essential to be captured. It needed to be lived, to become part of the dreamer's own constellation of healing. With infinite care, River cupped his hands not to capture, but to cradle the shimmering wisp. He hummed the shore's low frequency, guiding it gently deeper into Sage's sleeping form, watching as the boy's face softened further, a smile touching his lips, his small hands moving as if grasping at invisible currents. When Sage stirred awake, he didn't remember details, but carried the dream's essence like sunlight in his bones. He stretched, blinked, and then with spontaneous energy that surprised even himself, scrambled to the window and pointed to a seagull circling high above the waves. "Look how free he is!" Sage exclaimed, his voice clear and resonant, full of wonder that had been absent too long. "He's flying, and he knows exactly where he belongs." Sarah, who had been sketching quietly nearby, dropped her pencil as tears of pure relief filled her eyes. River simply smiled, understanding that the promise jar could remain empty now, not from absence but from abundance, from dreams that had learned to trust their rightful keeper once again. The lighthouse hummed with quiet celebration, its collection glowing a little brighter, honoring the return of one small heart to the vast, beautiful country of dreams. The transformation in Sage had awakened something equally profound within the lighthouse itself, as if the return of one small heart to the country of dreams had reminded every beam and stone of their deepest purpose. Luna felt it in the way. Morning light now danced differently through the windows, warmer somehow, more welcoming. River noticed it in the gentle hum that seemed to emanate from the very walls, a contentment that spoke of work, finding its truest expression through the quiet miracle of witnessed healing. Luna's presence had evolved from visitor to essential element, her artist's tools gradually claiming permanent residence among the lighthouse's treasures. Her easel found its natural place, where eastern light could paint her canvases with the same luminous quality that filled the dream jars. Brushes stood like wildflowers in mason jars beside the sink, and watercolor palettes dried on windowsills, their remaining pigments catching afternoon sun like tiny stained glass windows. River discovered that watching Luna work had become as meditative as tending dreams themselves. Her brush moved with the same patient rhythm he used to coax wisps from their hiding places, each stroke deliberate yet flowing, building layers of meaning the way healing builds layers of strength. She had begun painting not just the dreams themselves, but the invisible connections between them, how a child's laughter could illuminate an elder's memory, how courage from one heart could spark hope in another entirely. Their conversations deepened like tide pools revealed by receding water, exposing treasures that had always been present but required the right conditions to surface. Luna spoke of her artistic journey with new clarity, understanding now that her sleepless months had been preparation for this work, this partnership that honored both individual vision and shared purpose. River found himself sharing stories of Coral's teachings with someone who understood not just the words but the wisdom they carried, the profound responsibility of tending light in a world that sometimes forgot how desperately it needed gentle illumination. The townspeople of Saltmere began speaking of them as a natural pair, the way they might describe tides and shore, each essential to the other's fullest expression. Sarah noticed how Luna's presence seemed to amplify River's gift, creating an atmosphere where healing could unfold with even greater ease. Dr. Emerson observed that his evening visits now included quiet conversations with both lighthouse keepers, their combined understanding creating space for insights that neither could have reached alone. When Luna began staying through entire nights, it happened with the same organic inevitability as seasons changing, requiring no discussion or formal decision. Her art supplies claimed permanent residence in the upper room, and River found himself preparing tea for two, without conscious thought, their routines weaving together like complementary melodies, finding harmony. Their love declared itself not through words but through the countless small acts of tending they shared. River learning to read the subtle shifts in Luna's creative energy, Luna understanding exactly when the lighthouse work required gentle hands and patient hearts working in perfect synchronization. They moved through their days like dancers who had rehearsed together for lifetimes, each anticipating the other's needs with the intuitive grace of deep partnership. Evening found them arranging the day's dream collection together, Luna's artistic eye helping River perceive nuances he had never noticed, the way certain wisps seemed to sing when placed near others, how their combined luminescence created patterns that told stories larger than any single dream could hold. Their shared work became a form of meditation, hands moving in gentle coordination as they tended the spiraling constellation of human wonder that blessed everyone who encountered its glow. As autumn settled over Saltmere with its promise of longer nights, perfect for deep dreaming, the lighthouse stood as testament to love that had learned to honor both solitude and communion, both individual gifts and the profound magic that emerges when two hearts discover they can tend light together more beautifully than either could. Alone, the idea of opening the lighthouse's upper chambers came to River and Luna like dawn arriving, not sudden but inevitable, recognized rather than decided. Luna was mixing watercolors that seemed to hold their own inner light when she paused, brush suspended above her palette. "These dreams tell connected stories, don't they?" she said softly. "Each jar is a page in the same book about what it means to be human. People need to read that book, River. They need to remember they're part of something beautiful and shared." River felt the truth of her words settle into his consciousness like a wisp finding its perfect jar. Together they began preparing the lighthouse's upper floors with the same reverent care Coral had once brought to polishing the great lens. Luna painted the curved walls in shades of pearl and sea foam, colors that seemed to breathe with gentle calm. River arranged comfortable cushions in intimate circles, creating quiet alcoves where contemplation could unfold naturally. They selected the most luminous dream jars for the upper chamber, not the rarest or most dramatic, but those that pulsed with the universal experiences of wonder, courage, and tender memory. Golden wisps of childhood adventure found places near eastern windows where morning light could dance through their warm glow. Silver dreams of quiet understanding settled into shadowed corners where their gentle radiance could offer comfort. Without overwhelming, the dream library, as they came to call it, opened without announcement on the first crisp morning of November. River simply left the upper door unlocked and placed a small sign written in Luna's flowing script, "Quiet contemplation, welcome." Words spread through Saltmere with the same organic persistence as morning mist, carried in whispered conversations, and the inexplicable sense that something sacred was being shared. Sage had asked to help, his recovery now complete enough to embrace purpose beyond healing. He appointed himself the library page, a title that made his eyes shine with quiet pride. He learned to move through the spiraling chamber like a young monk tending candles, straightening cushions, adjusting jars so their light fell most gently on worried brows, offering chamomile tea to visitors who seemed to need extra comfort. Mrs. Holloway arrived first, climbing the winding stairs with the careful reverence of someone entering a cathedral. She settled near a cluster of dreams that pulsed with the warm gold of fresh bread and Sunday mornings, her weathered hands relaxing as decades of worry dissolved like sugar in warm tea. When she descended an hour later, she carried herself differently, lighter, more connected to the girl who had once believed in magic. Dr. Emerson chose the indigo corner, where contemplative dreams gathered like old friends sharing comfortable silence. He sat among wisps that shimmered with the deep satisfaction of healing work well done, and when he rose, his perpetually furrowed brow had smoothed into something approaching peace. "Thank you," he whispered to River, words carrying gratitude, too profound for longer explanation. A fisherman who hadn't ventured onto night waters since losing his partner in a storm found himself drawn to dreams of calm seas and safe harbor. He stared at his hands as if seeing them for the first time, while nearby jars pulsed with silver courage and the promise that some journeys, when ready, could begin again. Luna painted while visitors contemplated, her brush capturing not the dreams themselves, but the invisible healing that flowed between human hearts and preserved wonder. Her canvases began showing the lighthouse as she truly saw it, not just a building, but a living constellation where individual healing contributed to collective restoration. As winter's longer nights approached, the lighthouse had become something unprecedented, a place where the boundary between sleeping and waking grew thin enough for profound healing to flow freely. Visitors climbed the coastal path, carrying invisible burdens, and descended feeling reconnected to parts of themselves they had forgotten existed. River and Luna would close each day by walking through the dream library together, ensuring every jar was properly positioned, every cushion arranged for tomorrow's pilgrims. The lighthouse hummed with deep satisfaction, its collection glowing like captured stars, blessing all who sought the gentle country where wonder waits patiently for hearts ready to remember home. Winter's first storm arrived carrying secrets. In its salt-heavy wind, the kind of weather that seemed to hum with purpose rather than fury, River felt it in his bones before the clouds gathered, a different frequency in the air, as if the ocean itself was preparing to deliver something precious to Saltmere's shore. The waves rolled in with unusual gentleness, despite their size, and when dawn broke after the night of soft thunder and whispering rain, the beach held treasures unlike any he had ever encountered. The dream wisps scattered along the tide line pulsed with unfamiliar rhythms and colors that seemed to belong to different skies entirely. River knelt beside a particularly luminous fragment that shimmered with deep amber and carried the scent of cardamom and sun-baked clay, clearly the remnant of someone's sleep from a place where desert winds sang different songs. Another wisp glowed with crystalline blue and smelled of pine forests and mountain snow, its light holding the profound silence of high altitudes where stars felt close enough to touch. Luna found him there as morning painted the lighthouse walls in shades of pearl and gold, her artist's eye immediately recognizing the significance of what surrounded them. "River," she breathed, kneeling beside a wisp that pulsed with aurora green. "These aren't from anywhere near here. How is that possible?" Her voice carried wonder rather than concern, the same tone she used when discovering a new color that had no name. River felt understanding settle into his consciousness like pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known he was solving. The lighthouse's gentle influence had been growing quietly, its beacon of preserved wonder creating currents that extended far beyond the visible horizon. Dreams, he realized, were not bound by geography any more than tides were contained by single shores. The healing work they had been doing had created ripples that reached across oceans, connecting sleeping hearts in ways that defied every map ever drawn. They spent the morning cataloging these extraordinary arrivals with the same reverence they showed local dreams, each one a window into lives lived under different constellations. A child's dream from what felt like a Nordic fishing village glowed with fjord blue and carried the cry of Arctic birds. An elder's memory that tasted of olive oil and ancient stones pulsed with Mediterranean warmth. Most remarkably, a wisp shimmering with red earth and infinite sky seemed to hold the deep patience of landscapes that measured time in geological ages rather than human seasons. Sage arrived as they were arranging these international treasures. In the dream library, his eyes wide with the same wonder that had marked his return to dreaming. "Do they speak different languages?" he asked, watching a wisp that seemed to contain fragments of unfamiliar music. River smiled, humming the shore's low frequency until the foreign dream settled peacefully among their local companions, their lights harmonizing like voices finding common melody. Dr. Emerson, examining one of the distant dreams with scientific curiosity, declared it impossible by every medical principle he knew, then sat in comfortable contemplation while its inexplicable healing worked on worries he hadn't even realized he carried. Mrs. Holloway brought warm bread and lingered near dreams that pulsed with the universal rhythm of kneading dough and patient, rising, finding comfort in the recognition that some human experiences transcended all borders. As evening settled over the lighthouse, River and Luna understood they were no longer simply tending a local sanctuary, but stewarding something far more profound, a living testament to the invisible threads connecting every sleeping heart to every other, proof that wonder, once properly preserved, recognized no boundaries except those drawn by love and careful attention, to the sacred space where all dreams, regardless of their origin, could find safe harbor until morning called them home. The distant dreams that had begun washing ashore carried with them an unspoken invitation, as if the ocean itself was suggesting that wonder, once properly tended, was meant to flow beyond any single sanctuary. River felt this truth settling into his consciousness like morning light finding its way through lighthouse windows, illuminating corners he hadn't known existed. Luna noticed the shift first, the way his eyes would linger on visitors as they descended the coastal path, as if he was seeing not just their healing, but their potential to carry that healing forward into the world. It was Dr. Emerson who voiced what the lighthouse had been whispering for weeks. He arrived one evening carrying his medical bag and something else, a quiet urgency that spoke of hearts beyond his ability to heal with conventional remedies. "River," he said, settling into the chair where so many had found peace. "Mrs. Chen hasn't slept properly since her husband's stroke. She's caring for him around the clock, wearing herself thin as sea glass. I keep thinking about the peace people find here, wondering if there might be a way to carry some of that light to bedsides that can't make the journey up this path." River felt understanding bloom, like dawn breaking over distant water. The lighthouse's influence had been expanding naturally, organically, but it needed conscious tending to reach its fullest expression. He looked around at the spiraling constellation of preserved dreams, each jar pulsing with gentle luminescence, and realized they had become more than a collection. They were a living testament to what was possible when human wonder found patient, loving care. Luna set down her brush, her artist's intuition immediately recognizing the profound beauty of what Dr. Emerson was suggesting. "We could teach others the way Coral taught you," she said softly, her voice carrying the same reverence she brought to mixing colors that seemed to hold their own inner light. "Not to replace what we do here, but to plant seeds of the same garden, in different soil." They began with Sage, whose recovery had made him a natural bridge between trauma and healing. River taught him the shore's low frequency first, not as sound but as presence, the deep calm that allowed one to sense when dream. Wisps were ready to be gathered. Sage's small hands learned to move with patient attention, never forcing, always inviting, understanding that some dreams were shy and needed extra gentleness to feel safe. Mrs. Holloway joined them next, her baker's intuition already attuned to the rhythms of rising and settling. River showed her how to infuse her bread with the same peaceful intention that filled his sandwiches, each loaf becoming a small vessel for comfort that could travel from kitchen to kitchen throughout Saltmere. Her weathered hands, accustomed to kneading dough, found similar rhythm in tending the earthbound dreams that pulsed with warmth of home and hearth. Sarah discovered she had inherited something of her son's sensitivity to sleep's invisible currents, and she began learning techniques for creating safe spaces where troubled minds could process fear without being overwhelmed. Dr. Emerson learned to carry tiny vials of water that had sat among the dream jars long enough to absorb something of their gentle frequency, creating miniature sanctuaries in the most ordinary spaces. The teaching happened organically, without formal lessons or rigid schedules. River and Luna simply held space, demonstrating through their own lives that the greatest magic lay in the softest acts of care. They showed visitors how to truly see the light in the dream jars, how to feel the stories each wisp carried without needing explanation, how to honor the sacred space between sleeping and waking. As winter gave way to spring's first hints, Saltmere began to glow with new kind of light, not just from the lighthouse, but from within its people, who were learning to tend their own inner landscapes and recognize that the truest strength often lay in the gentlest acts of holding space for one another. The network of gentle tenders that had grown from River's teachings created new rhythms throughout Saltmere, but one tradition remained River's alone, the annual ritual that marked the anniversary of his mysterious arrival. As the date approached, Luna noticed the subtle shift in his attention, the way his eyes would linger on certain dream jars, as if listening to conversations only he could hear. This year felt different somehow, weighted with possibility that seemed to hum in the lighthouse's very walls. River moved through the dream library with meditative precision, his hands hovering over jars that pulsed with different frequencies of longing and hope. He sought not the most beautiful or rare dreams, but those that carried within them the readiness to journey again, dreams that had been properly tended and now yearned for new shores where their gifts could take root and flourish. His fingers paused over a jar that glowed with the soft iridescent green of sea glass, touched by morning light. Within its depths, a dream pulsed with patient aspiration, a young woman's long-held desire to learn the cello, to feel music flow through her fingers like water finding its course. River had preserved this dream for 3 years, watching as its initial fear transformed into quiet courage, its hesitation blooming into genuine readiness. As he lifted the chosen jar, footsteps on the coastal path announced an unexpected visitor. The woman who appeared at the lighthouse threshold carried herself with the same fluid grace River recognized in others who had learned to tend invisible gardens. Her dark hair held threads of silver that caught the evening light, and her eyes carried the deep calm of someone who understood the sacred nature of sleep. "I am Elena," she said simply, her accent carrying hints of Mediterranean shores and ancient olive groves. "I keep a lighthouse too, on the coast where dreams wash ashore, smelling of rosemary and carrying fragments of lullabies older than written memory. I followed one of your dreams home. It arrived at my shore 3 months ago, glowing with this same green light." River felt recognition bloom like dawn, breaking over familiar water. Luna looked up from her easel, immediately sensing the profound significance of this meeting. Elena reached into her traveling bag and withdrew a small jar that pulsed with warm amber, its light harmonizing perfectly with River's collection. "A child's dream of painting the sunset," she explained. "It began its journey here, I believe." The lighthouse itself seemed to hum with deeper satisfaction as the two keepers stood together, understanding passing between them like current finding its proper channel. Sage arrived as if summoned, his eyes bright with wonder at meeting another, tender of dreams. Mrs. Holloway followed, carrying warm bread and the intuitive knowledge that something sacred was unfolding. As twilight painted the sky in shades of lavender and pearl, they walked together to the shoreline. River carried his chosen dream, while Elena brought her own offering, proof that the network of healing they had sensed was real, vast, and connected, by currents deeper than any ocean chart could map. At the water's edge, River knelt and carefully opened the jar. The green wisp rose like hope given form, hovering between lighthouse and horizon, as if taking its bearings. Elena hummed a melody that seemed to come from ancient shores, and River added the shore's low frequency, their voices weaving together in harmonies that felt older than language. "May you find the hands ready to hold your music," River whispered, as the dream drifted seaward. "May you inspire the courage you carry to bloom wherever you land." Elena released her own dream simultaneously, the amber wisp joining its green companion, as they rode the evening tide toward horizons that held other lighthouses, other keepers, other hearts learning to tend the sacred space between sleeping and waking. Luna painted furiously, her brush capturing not just the ceremony but the invisible connections now visible, lines of light stretching across dark water, connecting sanctuary to sanctuary in a constellation of preserved wonder that blessed the entire world. As they climbed back up the coastal path, River understood that the lighthouse's true purpose had finally revealed itself, not just to preserve dreams but to demonstrate that wonder, properly tended, creates currents of healing that connect every shore, where human hearts learn to honor the gift of gentle sleep. The lighthouse glowed brighter that night, its collection pulsing with the satisfaction of work that served something infinitely larger than any single sanctuary could contain. Elena's departure had opened currents that could never be closed, but with the expanded awareness of the vast network of lighthouse keepers came an unexpected weight that settled into River's consciousness, like morning mist refusing to lift. He felt it most acutely during the quiet hours after visitors had descended the coastal path, when the dream library hummed with the collective presence of thousands of preserved dreams, each jar pulsing with its own fragment of human experience. The lighthouse had become something magnificent, but River began to sense that magnificence and wisdom were not always the same thing. He walked among the glowing constellation with steps softer than ever, a new question stirring in his heart like tide beginning to turn. The shelves, once spacious enough for each dream to tell its story clearly, had become dense with accumulated wonder, light crowding light until individual voices were lost in the chorus. Luna noticed the shift first, her artist's eye recognizing the subtle signs of a system straining against its own abundance. Some jars that once glowed easily now dimmed unless River stood nearby, as if drawing energy from his presence rather than radiating their own inner light. Visitors began lingering at the staircase rather than entering freely, their hearts sensing that too much beauty, gathered too tightly, could feel overwhelming rather than welcoming. "I think I've become a keeper rather than a shepherd," River confessed one evening, as they sat in Coral's chair, watching the great lens catch fragments of starlight. His voice carried the particular weight of someone recognizing a truth they weren't sure they were ready to embrace. "I love each dream, but sometimes the sheer volume of holding so much forgotten wonder feels heavy. Am I truly honoring them by simply preserving them here forever?" Luna set aside her sketchbook, her fingers tracing patterns in the air as she often did when processing complex ideas. "You know how I paint," she said softly, her voice carrying the gentle authority of someone who had learned wisdom through practice. "I pour everything into each canvas, but the moment of completion isn't when I stop adding. It's when I recognize the piece is ready to go out into the world, to inspire on its own. Art isn't about accumulation. It's about flow, about understanding when something has found its truest expression." She rose and walked to a jar that held a child's dream of endless summer afternoons, its golden light dancing with irrepressible joy. "Dreams are like seeds, River. Some are meant to bloom in specific gardens, some are meant to be carried by wind to distant fields, and some are meant to return to the earth, enriching the soil for future growth. You don't own these dreams. You tend them, and true tending means understanding when to nurture, when to guide, and when to allow natural cycles to unfold." River felt understanding bloom like dawn breaking over familiar waters. Elena and the other keepers he had glimpsed through her stories weren't just collectors, but participants in something far more dynamic. A living ecosystem where dreams flowed between shores, finding new purposes and inspiring fresh wonder wherever they landed. The annual ritual of releasing a single dream now seemed not generous but miserly. A single breath exhaled in the face of an ever-expanding inhale. The lighthouse itself seemed to exhale as this recognition settled into River's consciousness. Space appeared between the jars where none had existed moments before, and within that space, individual stories could be heard again. The collection pulsed with renewed vitality, no longer straining against its own abundance, but breathing with the natural rhythm of something alive and growing. River understood now that his role was evolving, just as Sage's dreams had needed to return before they could truly flourish. The lighthouse would always be a sanctuary, but it could also become something more, a living demonstration that wonder, properly tended, created currents of renewal that blessed both the dreams themselves and every heart they touched along their eternal journey home. The transformation began with the smallest gesture, as the most profound changes always do. River selected a jar that had pulsed with patient longing for 7 years, an elderly fisherman's dream of teaching his grandson to read the subtle language of tides and wind. The wisp shimmered with deep blue-green, carrying within its luminescence the scent of salt spray and the particular wisdom that comes from decades of watching horizons. He had preserved it carefully, but now he understood that preservation without purpose was merely beautiful hoarding. He carried the jar to the coastal path, where young Timothy Fletcher walked each morning to school, the same boy who had once been haunted by nightmares of his father's lost boat. Timothy had grown into a teenager, whose eyes held the steady calm of someone who had learned to trust sleep again, and when River offered him the glowing jar, understanding passed between them like current finding its proper channel. "This dream is ready to find new hands," River said simply. "It's been waiting for someone who understands both fear of the sea and love for it, someone ready to learn from waters that have stories to tell." Timothy accepted the jar with reverence, and as his fingers closed around the glass, the dream within pulsed brighter, recognizing its rightful destination. With this first deliberate release, the lighthouse began to breathe again. Dreams flowed like living tide, arriving on ocean currents and departing in the hands of those ready to nurture their gifts. Luna documented each release not in paint, but in memory, her artist's heart recognizing the profound beauty of dreams, finding their intended purpose. A teacher's dream of inspiring young minds found its way to Sarah, who discovered renewed passion for the classroom. A gardener's vision of impossible colors settled into Mrs. Holloway's weathered hands, blooming into beauty that extended far beyond bread. Dr. Emerson received a healer's dream that pulsed with the deep satisfaction of comfort, given freely, establishing what he quietly called lighthouse rounds, visits to homebound patients that left both doctor and patient feeling more connected to gentle mysteries. Each release created ripples that touched other hearts, other dreams, other possibilities, waiting for exactly the right moment to unfold. As the practice deepened, River became aware of responses arriving from distant shores. A wisp so delicate, it seemed woven from moonlight and ocean spray appeared one morning, smelling of jasmine, and carrying within its translucent depths an intricate pattern, a kind of signature from somewhere far beyond Saltmere's horizon. Luna recognized it as a symbol from island cultures, known for their reverence for lunar tides. River released a dream of his own in response, golden joy imbued with the shore's low frequency, carrying a question rather than a statement. 3. Weeks later, a small carved wooden bird arrived with the tide, jasmine-scented and bearing a tiny parchment inscribed with a single word, "Welcome." Through these gentle exchanges, a network revealed itself. River and Luna discovered others like Elena, a woman in mountain monasteries who gathered contemplative dreams in polished stone bowls, a man in bustling cities who preserved commuters, fleeting visions in glass spheres hanging from ancient courtyard trees. They communicated through dreams themselves, each wisp a letter trusting oceanic currents to find kindred spirits across impossible distances. Sage, now approaching his teenage years with quiet wisdom, earned through darkness and returned to light, asked to be trained not just as library page, but as full apprentice in dream tending. He began keeping careful notebooks, recording which jars brightened when certain songs were hummed, which visitors left with steadier steps after sitting beside silver dreams of endurance. The lighthouse transformed from isolated beacon to vital, node in a vast invisible constellation of gentle care. The dream library became a dynamic exchange where dreams were understood as vital, moving parts of global consciousness, ever renewing, ever connecting. The collection no longer strained against its own abundance, but flowed with natural rhythm, each jar part of an ever-changing constellation that honored both preservation and transformation. As autumn painted the coastal path in amber and gold, River understood that his work had evolved beyond anything Coral could have imagined. The lighthouse had become a living demonstration of how wonder, properly tended, creates currents of renewal that bless both dreams and every heart they touch along their eternal journey toward shores where they can finally bloom into fullest expression. The seasons had painted Sage into a young man whose quiet wisdom seemed to flow from the lighthouse stones themselves, his presence carrying the same gentle authority that had once marked River's own mysterious arrival. He approached River one evening as twilight painted the dream library in shades of pearl and amber, his movements deliberate, with the weight of a decision that had been growing like tide pools, filling slowly with starlight. "River," Sage began, his voice carrying the soft certainty of someone who had found their calling, "I want to learn everything, not just the gathering and tending, but the deeper currents, how dreams speak to each other across time, how they find the hearts that need them most, how to read the patterns that connect one sleeping soul to another." His words settled into the lighthouse's gentle hum like prayers finding their proper rhythm. River felt recognition bloom in his chest, not surprise, but the deep satisfaction of watching seeds planted in sorrow finally reach toward light. He had observed Sage's intuitive understanding deepen over the years, the way the young man moved through the dream library, like someone reading an ancient language written in luminescence, and whispered longing. "The greatest lessons live in the spaces between knowing and doing," River replied, his voice carrying the same gentle frequency he used to coax wisps from their hiding places. "They unfold like dawn, not through force, but through patient attention to what is already trying to emerge." River began teaching not with lectures, but with shared silences, standing together among the glowing constellation as evening light faded into star-touched darkness. He showed Sage how to listen with more than ears, how to feel the subtle weather that surrounded each jar, the way certain dreams hummed with readiness, while others pulsed with the need for deeper rest. The first profound lesson came through gentle mistake. Sage, eager to help an elderly woman whose grief had made sleep elusive, coaxed a silver wisp from her afternoon nap before it had finished its quiet work. The dream dimmed in its jar like a candle struggling in thin air, and when she woke, her eye still held the sharp edges of unprocessed sorrow. River didn't scold, but sat beside Sage on the winding stairs, placing the dimmed jar in the young man's trembling hands. "Some feelings need their full weather," he said softly. "Grief speaks in its own rhythm, and healing happens when we listen to that rhythm rather than trying to change it." Together they reopened the jar, and Sage hummed softer than breath until the wisp returned to complete its necessary conversation with loss. As autumn deepened into winter's contemplative embrace, Sage began keeping detailed notebooks that evolved into something unprecedented, a genealogy of dreams that traced patterns across decades of preserved wonder. His careful observations revealed connections that took River's breath away. Dreams weren't isolated fragments, but threads in an intricate tapestry where each wisp strengthened and informed every other. "Look at this," Sage said one morning. His notebook opened to pages covered with delicate sketches and flowing connections. "This dream of flying that arrived last week carries the same frequency as one you collected 15 years ago from Mrs. Holloway's grandmother. They're not separate experiences, but part of the same ongoing conversation between generations of sleeping hearts." Luna looked up from her easel where she had been working on a canvas, larger than any she had dared before. A visual map of the connections Sage was discovering, painted in watercolors that seemed to breathe with their own inner light. "We're witnessing something extraordinary," she whispered, her artist's eye recognizing patterns that connected individual healing to collective awakening. "The dreams don't just heal people, they're healing human consciousness itself, teaching us to remember our deepest wisdom." River felt understanding settle into his awareness like morning light, revealing a landscape that had always existed but never been fully seen. The lighthouse hadn't just been preserving individual dreams, but stewarding something far more profound, the living memory of human experience, learning to know itself through the gentle tending of its most precious fragments. Dr. Emerson, arriving for his evening visit, found the three lighthouse keepers surrounded by notebooks, paintings, and glowing jars arranged in patterns that seemed to pulse with their own significance. "What you've discovered," he said after studying Sage's genealogy charts, "suggests that consciousness itself dreams, and we're simply tending the visible expressions of that vast, sleeping awareness." As winter stars emerged overhead, the lighthouse hummed with deeper satisfaction than ever before. Sage's apprenticeship had revealed their work's truest purpose. They weren't just collectors or even shepherds, but participants in the eternal conversation between what has been and what might be, helping human consciousness remember its own infinite capacity for wonder, healing, and the gentle magic that flows between every dreaming heart and every other, across all boundaries of space, time, and the beautiful mystery of what it means to be human. The dream library glowed like captured starlight, each jar a word in the ongoing poem that sleeping hearts write together, blessed by patient hands that understand the sacred art of tending light in a world learning to trust its own deepest dreams. The revelation of dreams as living genealogy had awakened something profound in Luna's artistic vision, her previous canvases suddenly feeling like mere sketches for what was trying to emerge through her hands. She stood in the dream library's curved upper chamber, her artist's eye tracing the spiraling constellation of preserved wonder, and felt understanding bloom like dawn breaking over familiar waters. This collection wasn't just beautiful. It was a visual symphony of human consciousness, learning to know itself through the gentle tending of its most precious fragments. "I need to paint it," she whispered to River one morning, as golden light danced through the dream jars, casting shifting patterns across the curved walls. Not individual dreams, but the connections Sage discovered. The whole conversation that sleeping hearts have been having with each other across all these years. Her voice carried the particular urgency that belongs to artists when they glimpse something too vast for single canvases to contain. River felt recognition settle into his consciousness like morning tide finding its proper shore. He helped her prepare the largest wall in the dream library, a curved expanse that mirrored the gentle arc of the lighthouse itself, stretching from floor to the base of the great lens above. Luna called it her canvas of years, understanding that this work would require not days or weeks, but seasons of patient attention to capture what Sage's genealogy charts had revealed. She began not with dramatic strokes, but with layers of translucent washes, colors bleeding into one another like memories merging in the quiet depths of sleep. Golden hues pulsed with childhood wonder, the dreams of flying and endless summer afternoons that had sustained generations of young hearts. Deep indigo currents flowed with contemplative wisdom, carrying the weight of elders who dreamed of. Conversations with old friends and gardens tended across decades of careful seasons. River and Sage became her quiet collaborators, understanding that this masterwork belonged to all of them. River would hum the shore's low frequency while Luna worked, his presence steadying her hand the way it steadied approaching dream wisps. Sage brought his genealogy notebooks, pointing out connections that Luna translated into flowing pathways. Of light, how a grandmother's courage during wartime had somehow reached her granddaughter's first day at a new school. How a fisherman's dream of calm seas had settled into a mother's anxious sleep decades later. The painting grew organically, revealing its own logic as Luna's brush found rhythms that matched the lighthouse's eternal hum. Silver threads represented dreams, transformed from fear to understanding, the nightmares that had learned to become teachers carrying courage born from facing darkness with gentle patience. Vibrant greens evoked renewal and growth, the dreams that helped hearts remember their capacity for fresh beginnings, even after profound loss. As autumn deepened into winter's contemplative embrace, something extraordinary began to happen. The painting started to glow with its own inner light, not competing with the dream jars, but harmonizing with them, creating a visual symphony that seemed to breathe with the same rhythm as the collection itself. Visitors to the Dream Library found themselves drawn to it not just as art but as mirror, recognizing in its flowing patterns the landscape of their own sleeping hearts. Mrs. Holloway would trace the golden pathways with weathered fingers, remembering her grandmother's laughter, echoing through decades of peaceful mornings. Dr. Emerson discovered solace in the deep blues that spoke of healing found after long struggle, while Sarah and Sage would stand together before areas where courage bloomed from shadow, whispering stories of resilience and the quiet strength that comes from learning to trust sleep again. The most remarkable discovery came when River noticed that the painting responded to the lighthouse's daily rhythms. When new dreams arrived, certain sections would brighten almost imperceptibly. When dreams were released to find new homes, corresponding areas would shift in subtle ways that spoke of natural cycles completing themselves. Luna had created not just a masterwork but a living instrument for reading the deeper currents of the collection itself. On the first night of winter's longest darkness, Luna pressed her fingertip into a small pool of wet glaze near the painting's center, leaving a crescent of touch that seemed to pulse with gentle warmth. She didn't sign her name. This work belonged to everyone who had ever slept within reach of the lighthouse's blessing, everyone whose dreams had contributed to the vast, ongoing conversation about what it means to be beautifully, mysteriously human. The canvas of years became the lighthouse's true heart, a visual testament to decades of gathered wonder that helped visitors understand they were part of something infinitely larger than individual experience. It hummed with quiet satisfaction, blessing every dreamer who encountered its flowing light with the profound recognition that their sleeping hearts were connected to every other across all boundaries of time, space, and the gentle mystery that flows between every dream and every other, in the eternal country where wonder waits patiently for morning to call it home. As River, Luna and Sage stood together before the completed masterwork, the lighthouse itself seemed to exhale with deeper contentment than ever before, understanding that its work had found its truest expression in this living map of human consciousness, learning to tend its own infinite capacity for healing, connection, and the sacred art of keeping light alive in a world that desperately needed to remember how to dream. The canvas of years had been complete for 3 months when River first felt the lighthouse exhale, not the familiar hum he had known since childhood, but something deeper, like the sound stone makes when it finally settles into its permanent place. He woke one morning not to the usual rhythm of preserved dreams calling for attention, but to a profound stillness that spoke of work reaching its fullest expression. Luna felt it too, her artist's intuition recognizing the shift as she stood before her masterwork, watching how its luminous pathways seemed to breathe with their own satisfied rhythm. "It's finished," River said softly, though he wasn't speaking only of the painting. The lighthouse itself had reached something beyond completion, a state of being where its purpose and its expression had become perfectly aligned, like a song, finding its natural key after years of patient tuning. The transformation revealed itself most clearly in how Saltmere had learned to tend itself. Mrs. Holloway arrived each morning carrying warm bread and eyes bright with purpose, her weathered hands now reading the canvas of years like a map of where comfort was most needed. She would leave loaves on doorsteps without knocking, understanding that some gifts speak more clearly in silence. The bread itself had changed, not just nourishment, but communion, each loaf infused with the same peaceful intention that filled River's sandwiches. At the clinic, Dr. Emerson kept a small jar of smooth stones that had rested among the dream collection, pressing one into anxious palms before delivering difficult news. He had begun speaking quietly of the Saltmere effect to his medical colleagues. Patients from their community recovered faster, carried stress more lightly, possessed an innate resilience that seemed to flow from some invisible wellspring. He couldn't quantify it in medical terms, but he could observe its gentle miracles daily. Sarah had introduced what she called drift time at school, a quiet minute after lunch when children rested their heads while she read about tide pools or the patience of seeds. The classroom would soften during these moments, shoulders releasing tension that had no business living in such young hearts. Sometimes a child would whisper, "I felt something blue and peaceful," and the others would nod with understanding as if they had shared the same gentle vision. Down at the harbor, Timothy moved with the borrowed dream, steady in his pocket like a compass, teaching younger fishermen to read the water's subtle moods. The sea, respected rather than conquered, answered with safer passages and kinder returns. Even the night bus that carried workers between farms and town had become a traveling sanctuary, its driver keeping a thermos of lighthouse tea by her wheel, passengers sharing stories that turned cramped seats into intimate circles of unexpected connection. Sage, now tall and moving with quiet authority, had begun carrying his genealogy notebooks into the wider world. His careful documentation had revealed something extraordinary. The patterns he mapped weren't just connections between individual dreams, but the blueprint for how human consciousness healed itself when given patient, loving attention. He visited the elders' porch where dominoes clicked like gentle metronomes, sharing not proofs but stories, teaching teenagers to hum the shore's low frequency before exams, mending neighborhood rifts by placing jars of simple courage where they were most needed. "Look at this," Sage said one evening, his notebook open to pages covered with flowing connections. "The dreams aren't separate experiences anymore. They're part of a single conversation that the whole town is having with itself, awake and asleep." His discovery illuminated what River had been sensing. The lighthouse had evolved beyond preservation into something unprecedented, a place where human consciousness could observe its own infinite capacity for healing and connection. Luna touched the canvas of years with reverent fingertips, understanding that her masterwork had become more than paint on wall. It was now a living mirror where anyone could glimpse their place in the vast, ongoing conversation between sleeping hearts. Visitors no longer saw individual jars, but recognized the collection as a breathing entity, where a grandmother's silver patience could speak directly to a young father's golden anxiety, where a child's rainbow possibility harmonized with an elder's deep blue acceptance. As winter gave way to spring's first whispers, River understood that his role had evolved once more, from keeper to witness of something far more profound than preservation. The lighthouse had become living proof that wonder, properly tended, creates currents of healing that connect every shore where human hearts learn to honor the sacred space between sleeping and waking. On evenings when the great lens caught starlight and scattered it through the dream library, River, Luna, and Sage would stand together before the canvas of years, feeling the lighthouse hum with deep satisfaction around them. They had become custodians not just of forgotten dreams, but of humanity's capacity to remember its own deepest wisdom, to recognize that every sleeping heart was connected to every other across all boundaries of time, space, and the beautiful. Mystery of what it means to dream together in the gentle country where wonder waits patiently for morning to call it home. The lighthouse glowed with quiet contentment, its work having reached its truest expression, not as ending, but as eternal. Beginning, blessing every dreamer who encountered its light with the profound recognition that they were part of something infinitely larger and more beautiful than any single heart could contain alone. Time moved differently around the lighthouse now, flowing, like tide pools that had learned to hold starlight, not rushing toward any destination, but deepening with each gentle turn of season. River's hair had begun to silver at the temples, like morning frost on sea glass, and his movements carried the measured grace of someone who had learned that the most profound work happens in the spaces between action and rest. He felt it in the way his hands paused longer over each dream jar, reading stories that had grown familiar as his own heartbeat, understanding that familiarity and wonder could deepen together like roots, finding richer soil. Sage moved through the lighthouse with increasing authority, his presence carrying the same gentle certainty that had once marked River's mysterious arrival. The young man's intuition had matured into something approaching wisdom. He could sense when dreams were ready to journey onward, when visitors needed silence rather than guidance, when the lighthouse itself required nothing more than patient witness to its own eternal rhythm. River watched this development with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had planted seeds in darkness and now witnessed them reaching toward light. The teaching between them happened not through formal lessons but in shared silences, hands working together to arrange the day's collection, voices harmonizing as they hummed the shore's low frequency to settle restless wisps. River began entrusting Sage with the morning rituals he had cherished most, polishing the great lens until it held sky, choosing which dreams would welcome sunrise, walking the shoreline to greet whatever gifts the sea had whispered home during the night. Each responsibility passed like a torch changing hands, the flame growing brighter rather than dimmer in the transfer. "Listen where the silence leans," River said one evening as they knelt together at the water's edge, watching a particularly delicate wisp test the air between lighthouse and horizon. He cupped his hands not to capture, but to cradle the space around the drifting fragment, letting Sage feel how restraint could be its own form of care. Not everything belongs with us. Sometimes returning is the keeping, and the truest tending is knowing when to let wonder find its own way home. Luna documented these moments not in grand canvases, but in delicate sketches that captured the subtle dance between mentor and apprentice. River's weathered hand resting gently on Sage's shoulder, the way their shadows merged as they stood together. Before the canvas of years, the quiet exchange of understanding that flowed between them like current, finding its proper channel. She understood that this transition was not about replacement, but about continuity, a river flowing into wider sea without losing its essential nature. The townspeople of Saltmere embraced Sage's growing leadership with the same organic acceptance. They had always shown the lighthouse's gentle mysteries. Mrs. Holloway began leaving her warm loaves directly in his hands, her eyes bright with the recognition that some gifts transcend the giver. Dr. Emerson found himself discussing the deeper currents of healing with someone whose understanding had been shaped by years of witnessing how dreams and waking life wove together in patterns too beautiful for medical textbooks to contain. Letters continued arriving from distant shores, jasmine-scented notes from Elena, carved tokens from mountain keepers, postcards stitched with lunar symbols from city sanctuaries. They all carried the same message in different languages of care. The lighthouse's influence was spreading through currents deeper than any single keeper could direct, creating a living constellation of healing that blessed coastlines across the world. River read these aloud by lamplight, while Sage traced connection maps in his notebooks, understanding that stewardship could expand without breaking anything precious. As autumn painted the coastal path in shades of amber and gold, River felt deep contentment settle into his bones like morning tide finding its perfect shore. The lighthouse had evolved beyond anything Coral could have imagined. Not just sanctuary, but living demonstration of how consciousness could tend its own infinite capacity for healing and connection. He spent evenings in her old chair by the great lens, sometimes catching glimpses of pearl-white light that pulsed with familiar warmth, understanding that some blessings wait patiently across all boundaries of time and space. The great lens caught starlight and scattered it through the dream library, where thousands of preserved dreams pulsed with gentle luminescence, each one a word in the ongoing poem that sleeping hearts write together. River understood that his role was transforming once more, from active keeper to gentle guardian of something that had learned to tend itself, preparing for the final passage that would make him part of the light he had served so faithfully. So long. The longest night of winter arrived like a gentle exhale, painting Saltmere in starlight so clear it seemed the heavens had drawn closer to witness something sacred. River woke before dawn as he had for decades, but this morning the lighthouse's hum carried a different frequency. Not farewell, but welcome, as if the very stones were preparing to embrace him in ways deeper than flesh could contain. Luna stirred. Beside him, her artist's intuition sensing the shift, her hand finding his with the natural grace of tides meeting shore. River moved through his morning rituals with meditative precision, each gesture carrying blessing rather than routine. He polished the great lens until it held not just sky but eternity itself, arranged dream jars so their light would dance most gently through the coming day, prepared sandwiches with ingredients that tasted like memory and hope braided together. Sage arrived as sunrise painted the lighthouse walls in pearl and gold, understanding without words that this day would be different, touched by the sacred mystery that flows between what has been and what will always be. They walked the shoreline, together one final time, teacher and student moving with synchronized rhythm. River gathered the morning's dream wisps, with hands that seemed to glow with inner light, but when they reached the tide pools where Coral's teachings lived in foam and starlight, he knelt and opened every vial, releasing the collected dreams. Back to the sea. Some gifts complete their circle by returning to source, he said softly, watching wisps rise like luminous butterflies, dancing on salt breeze before merging with the vast conversation between sky and water. These dreams have done their work here. Now they're ready to find new shores, new hearts, new possibilities we can't imagine. Sage nodded with understanding deeper than words, his own hands opening to release the morning's final wisp, a child's dream of endless summer that sparkled with golden joy as it rode wind toward distant horizons. As evening settled over Saltmere, the townspeople climbed the coastal path, carrying not sorrow but celebration, understanding that some transitions are too beautiful for grief. Mrs. Holloway brought bread still warm from ovens blessed by decades of peaceful mornings. Dr. Emerson's hands were steady with healing learned from watching wonderwork, quiet miracles. Sarah's eyes were bright with knowledge that children in her care would always carry something of the lighthouse's gentle magic. River settled into Coral's chair by the great lens as stars emerged overhead, Luna beside him with paint-stained fingers, tracing patterns in air, Sage arranging dream jars so their light would welcome whatever dreams arrived on tomorrow's tide. The lighthouse hummed with deep satisfaction, its collection glowing like captured starlight, blessing every heart that had ever found refuge in its spiraling chambers. As sleep began calling him toward the deepest rest, River felt familiar stirring, a dream ready to emerge. But this wisp that detached from his peaceful brow was unlike any he had ever seen. It pulsed with every color he had preserved, carried essence of every heart he had helped heal, shimmered with accumulated wisdom of decades spent tending the sacred space between sleeping and waking. Luna and Sage watched with wonder as the wisp settled not into jar but into the great lens itself, becoming part of the lighthouse's eternal glow. River's breathing softened into rhythm that was almost the room's breathing, then simply was. His final dream was of endless shores, where every dreamer sleeps peacefully, knowing their forgotten wonders are safe in gentle hands. The lighthouse continues to glow, now tended by Sage and visited by Luna, who still paints dreams and tells stories of the gentle keeper who taught a town to honor its forgotten wonder. The dream collection flows like living tide, each jar testament to the beauty of caring for others' rest. And somewhere in the soft space between sleeping and waking, he's still there, walking the shoreline at dawn, gathering dreams that drift like gifts on morning tide, tending the eternal conversation between what has been and what might be. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well, everything's going to be okay.